Welcome to the BreachLock Platform and the demo of the PTaaS Vulnerabilities feature. Upon logging in, the user will see a set of features on the left and a tab for the Vulnerabilities feature. When the user clicks on this feature, it will reveal a real-time, absolute transparent view of their penetration testing scope and in-depth vulnerability details identified during pen testing, including unpatched and patched vulnerabilities. We will go through all of the context associated with the vulnerabilities feature shortly. BreachLock offers human-led manual pen testing as well as continuous pen testing that is automated, providing our clients with the flexibility and versatility to choose the solutions that best align with their business and security requirements. BreachLock recommends a hybrid approach or a combination of both manual and continuous pen testing for the best outcomes. For continuous pen testing or scanning, please refer to our attack surface management and continuous pen testing demos. The PTaaS feature of the BreachLock platform reflects the results of human-led or manual pen testing only. The PTaaS vulnerability feature or dashboard provides easy consumption for a CISO or executive in the organization and is a pictorial representation of their risk exposure. Once the user clicks on the Vulnerability tab, it will show a holistic view of your testing environment, starting with in-depth details for unpatched vulnerabilities. The user can toggle between unpatched and patched vulnerabilities, but let's start with those that remain unpatched. As mentioned, the vulnerability dashboard will provide a rolled-up view of each vulnerability identified, the type of vulnerability or name, and the associated risk severity. When it was identified or discovered, the number of assets affected by that specific vulnerability, a project ID number, and the ability to create a ticket to request support. If the user clicks on the far left on the project ID number, the vulnerability details will pop up for that specific vulnerability. In this case, it is the Heartbleed vulnerability. This screen is extremely important as it provides the evidence or proof of concept that the vulnerability exists and which assets are impacted. Let's start at the top. Once you click on the individual vulnerability, the user will see a description of the vulnerability, details regarding the vulnerability itself. In this case, this is an open source web application or software that was installed and not properly configured, and the default credentials provided for initial authentication and configuration never changed. Unfortunately, the credentials were well known by the pen test user and therefore by potential malicious attackers who can use them to gain access to various types of applications. These are the type of details users can expect within the description of the vulnerability itself. But by digging deeper, BreachLock offers the risk severity or the CVSS score. In this case, it is 8.3, which is very high, and CVSS vector. BreachLock supports both CVSS 3 and 4. Details also include the assets impacted and their IP addresses, as well as evidence via an automatic proof of concept or POC. The POC is proof that the vulnerability exists, where it was found, and is evidence that the vulnerability is not a false positive, but actually a high risk to the organization. In this case, the Heartbleed vulnerability was found on a specific port due to an unpatched version of an open SSL and its implementation of the transport layers and security protocols. Both assets impacted and their respective POCs are shown here. The POC is then followed by recommendations for remediation. This is based on what will happen if no action is taken. In this case, if the vulnerability is not remediated, it will allow attackers to eavesdrop on communications, for example, and steal data directly from the services and users, and to impersonate services and users. So let's click out of this view. The user can simply close out of the screen to go back to the rolled up view of vulnerabilities and click on the next unpatched vulnerability to see the same details. Now, adjacent to each vulnerability is the risk severity, when it was last discovered, and the assets affected. When the user clicks on this box, it will open enlisting the assets affected, including their location. They are listed by rows of 10, but in this case, it only shows 2 assets that were affected. Alongside each vulnerability, there is a request for support, which gives the user the ability to create a ticket. If an ID number appears in this column, a ticket has already been created. For example, in the Heartbleed vulnerability, you will see a request ID number, and that means a ticket has already been pulled. Otherwise, the button will state Create a Ticket. Simply click on this button, and a box will pop up, allowing the user to input ticket information and request support. The user can simply hit Submit. Whenever a ticket is created, the designated BreachLock project manager is notified of the ticket, and the SLA response time is within 24 hours. Now that we have covered unpatched vulnerabilities, let's move to the Patch Vulnerabilities tab. Once you click on the Patch Vulnerabilities tab, you will once again see the vulnerability ID number, the name of the vulnerability, the risk severity, and the patch status. This includes the date that the vulnerability was patched and the assets affected. If you click on the vulnerability ID, a box will pop up providing further details, including the vulnerability name and description, risk severity, CVSS score and vector, and addresses of the assets impacted. In the upper right corner is an orange Export tab. When the user clicks on this, they can either export a CSV or Excel file and download a report. If the user requires an export from the Unpatched Vulnerabilities tab, then the output is for unpatched vulnerabilities and vice versa. The export is specific to the tab to provide a more focused output for users. So to recap, the PTaaS vulnerability feature is a real-time, absolute, transparent view of an organization's penetration testing results conducted manually by BreachLock OSCP, OSCE, and CREST-certified pen testing experts. The PTaaS vulnerability feature provides easy consumption for security teams to review all identified vulnerabilities and assets impacted, whether patched or unpatched. Unpatched vulnerabilities will have in-depth details about the vulnerability, including a proof of concept of the vulnerability, as well as remediation recommendations. Patch vulnerabilities, for example, will disclose all vulnerabilities that have been remediated, assets affected, and the patching status and any action taken. This concludes the PTaaS vulnerability feature of the BreachLock platform. Thank you.